I like the opening. I like that. It's my favorite part about what we. That's not my favorite part, but I do like it. Anyways, hey everybody, this is Brian Altunian, co-host of Just Two Dads, our weekly podcast, where Shawn Francis and I, my partner in Thrive, get together and have conversations around the things that matter to us in the world, and especially for those of us who deal with family members who have been diagnosed with some form of special needs, and special needs transcends the conventional theory of what that of what some people think about that, because in the end, at some point in time, we're all going to have some form of special need, whether we're being cared for as an elderly adult or after an accident or some other things that can occur in our lives. We may all fall under this category. So the things that we talk about on this podcast transcend the again, what I would say the traditional definition of what a special needs issue is. So thank you for joining us. For those of you who are catching us on Facebook Live, welcome. Great to have you all here. Know that if you're not catching us live, hopefully you're catching us on our YouTube channel. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to like and share and comment. If there's anything in particular you'd like us to discuss on our podcast, please feel free to contribute. We'd love to make this expand our community. In addition to our YouTube channel and on Facebook, we're also on podcasts such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Spotify, pretty much every outlet where where you can find podcasts. You can see Just Two Dads. And here Shawn and I have conversations with phenomenal people in the special needs communities. Also, for our family and friends in the U.S. Virgin Islands, we can be heard on WSTX AM radio every Monday afternoon. So hope to get more listeners and viewers and participants in the conversation. We've got a great show for you today. Special guest. We're hiding her in the back studio right now, but special guest we'll be bringing on here in a little bit. But before we do that, Shawn and I are going to begin the conversation on something that we've been discussing over the last couple of weeks. And before we get into that, I want to welcome my partner in Thrive and my colleague and my family, Mr. Shawn Francis. How are you today, sir?
I am blessed, thankful, and grateful. As I say that, I'm always like, I say that every week. But I really am, though. I'm really appreciative for what we get to do. There's days where, you may have a challenge or a bump in the road in life. And by the time we get to this portion of the day, I find myself ready to go. And then when we wrap, I find that I'm recharged. So, our attempt to add value is a blessing that I am forever and eternally grateful for. So, and as you said, I'll echo the sentiments again. Hello to my family and friends in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I'm listening on WSTX, everywhere podcasts can be found. And let's kind of jump into it. So we were talking, you and I, about reading a book right now called Manifesting for Non-Gurus. And I should preface this: we have not talked about any books or publications or anything like that on the show. And typically when one does that, you will have the author on the show. Maybe Mr. MacPhee will see this and want to be on the show at some point. Who knows? But the book is called Manifesting for Non-Gurus: How to Quickly and Easily Attract Lasting Results by Robert MacPhee. And so it is a very simple and distilled.
Wait, we're not getting paid, by the way. We're not promoting the book, right? We just everybody clear. Like, this is a book that was recommended that you read and talk about that, and then talk about what the book is. What was it that why are you reading this book, and what was the goal here?
Well, I'm always, as you know, and as we both are, I'm always reading something in the realm of personal development. And so as the deeper we get into this journey, not that the journey as a special needs parent is new. Elijah is going to be 15 next month and was diagnosed with autism at the age of 3. But as we begin to expand our horizon in these conversations with the show, everything that I look at from a general standpoint, we look at it from a special needs perspective. And one of the topics in this book happened to touch on that. So it's about manifesting. And one of the first things in the book, it talks about the way to first begin your manifestation in a real simple manner is by identifying who you are at your core, who you really truly are. And that's something that can be challenging to begin with, because it states that who you are is not your title, not your job, not what you do, not even necessarily what you love to do brings you pleasure. And it definitely is not your outward appearance, your body. It's at a deeper core, a spiritual sense, so to speak. And if it is difficult for a person that has no special needs component in their life to figure out who they really are, especially because I think the longer you live, the more difficult it is to define that. That has to be and is twice as much of a challenge if you're caring for someone with special needs, because that very quickly becomes who you are. Just like, I am a husband or a wife, a mom or a dad, a policeman, or whatever the title is that you affix to yourself. And I think it's worthwhile because when we have a clearer picture as to who we are and what our purpose is, it allows us to better serve those around us as well.
Yeah. So to define that, right? So some people say like, who are you? Isn't it interesting when we introduce ourselves? We usually introduce ourselves who we are as like kind of like what we do, right? Hi, I'm a lawyer, right? Or I'm a professional actor or whatever it is, right? I'm a finance. It's always generally it's sort of an accepted practice to say who we are, but based on what we do, which is a little bit right. And that, as we find, especially as we change careers or we change paths, that what we do doesn't really define who we are at all. It's really clearly just what we do. I know a lot of self-development courses focus on or help people focus on, defining who you are in the world. I'm usually a big fan of. Oh, I'm noticing my collar is a little off today. You didn't mention how badly my collar was off today, so now that's
not.
Who I am. Who I am is somebody vain, apparently. But I like to not only to define, but also acknowledge people, as to who they are. Like, who are you in the world for me, right? Who are you in the world? Doesn't have to be for me. Just who do I see you in the world, right? So I think that once people realize that we all have a self-perception, or who we think we are, and then we have an idea of who we think other people think we are, and then other people have their perception about actually who they think we are, right? And so if you don't know a group of people and you walk in, they don't have anything to go off of except for who you're presenting yourself to be from that moment forward. I always tell people, when I coach or mentor, is that you walk into a room, you define who you are. Now, if you carry with you baggage of like what you did or where you've been or all that stuff, then that's going to carry forward. The reality is people who don't know you don't know anything about that background, and it's irrelevant to them unless you make it something that's them, right? Unless you make it something that's relevant, right? So you walk in basically and are in the whole mode of, who I am in the world is, right? And I went through a self-development process myself, and I've defined myself to be, and I'm going to say this definition, and then you can acknowledge whether you think that this actually fits, right? And this is going to be very simple, and it's going to sound very woo-woo for all those people who are listening. Like, I want to hear some men talk, some real men talk. Like, you're going to, oh my God, who I am in the world is that all people are acknowledged, right? Who I am in the world is all people are honored. That's it. Who I am in the world is that all people are honored. When I interact with anybody, I always honor the space that they're in. I don't know their story, their backstory, all I know is that when you're in front of me, when I walked into the room that one day 6 years ago, and I didn't know anybody, you were, to me, who you were in the moment for me when I first met you 6 years ago is who you still are to me today. And that's somebody who is incredibly caring, incredibly thoughtful, somebody who is generous in spirit and heart. I walked into a room that I had no idea why I was even there, for a presentation for some kind of business I didn't know anything about. The person who invited me wasn't there. And I walked in and you were the first person that I encountered, and you made me feel relaxed, comfortable, welcomed, and part of a community that I had no idea about. So that's how I've always known you. Since then, all right, how my definition of you in the world has expanded to include all of these other things, and the commonality that we have children who have special needs issues, it just happened to be a nice area where we had overlap. But who I know you to be in the world, I honored you because who I know you to be in the world is who you presented yourself to me the very first moment that we got together. And again, I think that this is a little bit about that, right? If you can define yourself at who you are in the world, it and you can step into that and live into that, in my opinion, I think that you get, it's almost like putting on a pair of glasses and seeing the world through that lens. Absolutely. Would you agree with that? And does that interact? Does that overlap with kind of what the book is about? I haven't read the book.
It does. And this is just a portion of the book. And I'll be honest, I'm not even finished with the book. That portion of it just really hit me. That's just the first couple chapters. But I think that's accurate and right. And the other thing is, it touches on how we see ourselves, because you just do what you need to do. When your child is diagnosed with, in my case, in our case, Elijah, with autism at the age of 3, like, I am now going to put on a suit with an A on it for autism, and I'm going to be a hero parent. You don't think of that. You just do what you need to do. And sometimes, depending on, this is a term that I think you've heard me use before, depending on how clean our mirror is. And I say that because I think most people's mirror is very dirty. In other words, they see themselves in a way that's either much greater than they actually are, which prevents them from being as great as they could be, or they see themselves far less greater than they actually are. Okay, which too prevents them from being as great as they could be. I appreciate what you said of me, because that reminds me, I didn't step into like, well, let me be this caring person or whatever. Sometimes you can forget who you are in that sense, and in terms of giving yourself credit. And then for a person that is raising someone with special needs, if the disability is severe and the dependence, the level of dependency is high, you can really completely forget who you are, or who you might have been meant to be, or whatever the case might be. And then that limits what you have to give to the person that you're caring about, which then limits what you have to then give to the world. And that may be a lot to unwrap, because so many people are just trying to deal with today as opposed to aspiring to do anything other than wake up the next day. But I think it's always a conversation that's worth having. And the hope is that by the time we finish this up and wrap up this episode, that people will walk away feeling like, yeah, I think I remember who it is that I want to be, because who you are at your core is important. What is just as important is who you would like to be also.
Yeah,
so we can go a bunch of different directions.
Yeah, no, for sure. I look at this and again, I think that's a great comment. I think for viewers and listeners, as you go through this, the reality is your life is a blank slate. It's for you to define, right? The labels that other people apply to us, sometimes we apply to ourselves, are really just that. They're labels. They're man-made. They're completely fabricated. They don't mean anything unless you give them meaning. So the concept of, and again, think about it. And we transition, right? When we have children, we go from being, for me, like I go from being, a husband now to Jordan's dad, right? That's a label. That's a role. I'm Jordan's dad, but I'm also Gabby's dad, and I'm also Blake's dad. And those are different roles. There's different things that come with that, right? Or, I'm a former this, or I used to do that, or again, those are labels that don't mean anything. They're just areas for people to kind of find common ground so that they can identify with those labels. But the reality is okay, a little bit of an echo, Shawn, when you speak. The labels that we apply, not only is it man-made, but you have a clean slate and you can define it. And I give one quick example, and then we'll keep going on the subject. But I remember mentoring a young woman. I was at a time that I used to work in the entertainment industry, and I was giving her a mentor, mentor counseling. We were talking, and I said, what is it that you want to do with your life? Like, where do you want to go next? And she said, well, I want to be a multimedia producer. Now, let me just say this. First of all, this was a long time ago, before anybody even knew what multimedia was, by the way. And that term has evolved considerably since then. And I said, okay, and so what do you have to, so why aren't you that? And she said, well, I don't really actually know what it is that I have to do in order to be that, right? And so we have had this conversation before, you and I, this concept of be, do, have, right? Or like, I have to, I actually, and some people go the other way around. Like, what do I have to do in order to have something, in order to be something, right? I got to go to school in order to get a degree, in order to get a good job, in order to make a lot of money, in order to be happy, right? Do, have, be is usually the world that we live in. I've got to go do something in order to have something. In her particular case, I don't know what to do to be a multimedia producer. I have to go to school, I guess, and take a class, and then get a degree, and then start to do stuff so that I then can be that. And I said, well, what happens if you flip the switch on that? What if you define yourself as a multimedia producer, right? And so she's like, I don't know what that means, or what would I say? I say, okay, well, let's just play with this a second. Put on a pair of glasses that happen to have a different color lens, where you have, the minute you put the glasses on, you have amnesia as to what the world looked like a second ago, and now you're seeing the world through a multimedia producer. So looking out the window, I think we were at a restaurant having lunch at the time we were talking about this, and a bus drove by, and I said, so there's an ad on the side of that bus. As a multimedia producer, what do you see? And she was like, oh my God, I see that complete. I honestly don't even look at bus signs before. Right now, looking at a bus sign through the lens of, I'm looking at it from the lens of a multimedia producer. I'm thinking of all of the things that we can do with that, audio, video, interactive games around that, right? And I'm like, okay, so you've just defined what a multimedia producer does, but that was after you defined yourself as a multimedia producer. So again, the point that I'm making is that if you could put on a pair of glasses, wake up tomorrow morning with amnesia, get out of bed, put on a pair of glasses with the lens of who you are in the world, as you would like to define yourself in the world. Look at the world through that lens. Headlines on newspapers will look different. Things on television will look different. The internet will look different. Your searches will look different. Your results of your searches will look different if you're reading them through the lens of who you've defined yourself to be in the world. So again, in my opinion, the idea identifying who you are. So you said when you didn't consciously take on the role of providing some support or care for a complete stranger who walked into your office that night. But the reality is you didn't have to, because you live your life in that space. You live your life in the space of who you are in the world, is a caring, empathetic person who, looks out for other people. And you're conscious of the environment, so that if somebody walks into that environment, you're thinking, you process, maybe unconsciously, you process what their experience is walking into that space, and then you address it. It was almost like you were like, hey man, I know this is probably a weird place to be, right? Or I know this doesn't make any sense, but hang with us. Like, this is all good. Who invited you? This is amazing. You're going to love this. This is great, right? And you addressed my concerns, my issues, and just brought my anxiety level down. And that's not because you did anything, but because who you were being. And I think
right.
that is, that is the manifestation. We can manifest anything in this world by defining who we are in the world first, because not only does it tell you what you will do, but it also tells you it will also kind of determine what you don't do, right? Mm-hmm. Multimedia producer means one thing. It may not mean, somebody who builds houses. Like, that's not a multimedia producer, right? That's an area where you won't do that. It's clear. And by the way, knowing what you don't want to do is almost as effective as knowing what you do want to do, right? Sure. Because you eliminate all of those things that could possibly waste your time or are incongruent and out of integrity with who you've defined yourself to be in the world. Mm-hmm. So yeah, very definitely. Long speech and all that. I apologize for going on.
No. It's the nature of the subject will do that. And things come up. It's funny because as you're saying that, I'm also thinking there have been times in my life, the further back I go in my life, the younger I was, the less inclined I might be or put it this way, there are more instances there are where I was less inclined to act upon the instinct to go help in that regard. Like, just for some reason, I don't know, being, I was outgoing as a kid, but at the same time shy. And there'd be times where you're like, you just stop. Actually, if I stop and think at all in those instances, I'm thinking before I go out, like, well, maybe I think they're going to be okay. And you don't really do anything. Whereas who I am now and have been for quite some time is that I'm less likely to think about it at all, which means I'm more likely to just do that. So I think that's also a key to being who you're meant to be or who you are at your core, which is thinking about reactions or actions just a little less. That carries a lot of weight too.
Yeah, I think the clearer you are about who you are, the clearer it becomes about what you do. Listen, we all would love to be driving on a freeway and stop and help somebody who is on the side of the road needing some help, right? I mean, maybe not everybody does that. Maybe some people live in a big city like Los Angeles and like, oh God, I never want to do that. But I think if we care about other people, we probably all, or a lot of us, would like to do that. Yet not many people do it, right? There are some people who will, we talk about, like, Shawn Villalobos, one of our partners and mentors. If there's somebody stuck on the side of the road, he will stop his car and help. And by the way, he's in a position to do no matter what it calls for, and B, it's kind of who he has set himself out to be in the world. It defines what he does. Like, it's really that it's a manifestation, which is the theme of that book, right? It's the manifestation of who we've created ourselves to be. I love this. I can talk about this conversation all day long. I love the concept of manifesting. I was a psych major in school, undergrad. I loved how the human brain works. I love how human behavior and human interaction works. So I'm a big fan of this kind of conversation. And I've done a lot of work in the area of self-development and self-improvement. So it's an area that I'm very conscious of. Right. But you had a specific, and I'm just guessing, I'm going to throw this out there, like a specific topic that, in this manifestation thing that you wanted to cover. I want to make sure we cover that, and then I want to bring on our guest today as well.
The topic I was thinking of, and it's beginning to unravel in different directions or grow as we talk here. But it was how, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's challenging enough. So when we come into the world, I believe we're as close to perfect as most of us are ever going to get. Okay. When you take a step and you fall, even if there's blood, you get back up and you'll run again. If you fall enough and you have enough people around you who love you and ask you to slow down, then you will slow down. You'll take less chances, and literally and metaphorically, you will run less and walk more often. And what happens is we're so much closer to fearless in the beginning, closer to who we are at our core. It's not muddied up. The universe hasn't really, or the world around us, the physical world hasn't changed that. So as an adult, that gets changed somewhat. That's who you're supposed to be, who people see you as, who you ought to be, who you're, most people think you should be, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then by the time you have a child, if your child is then diagnosed with a disability or there's a catastrophic accident, whatever it is that puts them into the special needs category, it then becomes even more difficult to kind of figure out, well, who are you really, at your core? I remember sitting around thinking I'm very much into voices. I'm attracted to them. I pay attention to them. Just like people have favorite vocalists as far as singing goes, I have favorite voices of people that speak, and I pay attention to the voices of singers. And a voice is something that is very identifiable to a person. But who we are at our core isn't even our voice, if you think about it. So when you ask the question, who are you and who are you really, that can really take on such so many dynamics. But I think when a special needs component is added to that, it is really, really difficult to then find out who you are. And I don't know how many parents, fellow parents of or caregivers of one with special needs are listening to us and wondering this themselves, or wondering if we're off our rocker, and they're like, I know who I am. I'm a special needs parent. I just think it's something to, to really ponder. And I think it's one of those things that we're going to discuss again, because I'd like feedback from some of the parents out there that, can let us know how clear they feel on where they and who they are at their core, or how much of a challenge that is. The point being, though, is that the more clear you are as to who you really and truly are, I think the less obstacles are in the way of one's happiness. And that is something that is definitely challenged when caring for a child with special needs. But with regard to our special guest, the other thing that I thought of, our guest posted is someone that got married recently, was diagnosed with a condition that put her in the special needs category, and she's been married recently, as I mentioned, able to express what it's like living with her situation. So what that did is made me think of Elijah, my son, and him not at this stage being able to clearly express that. And I'm like, well, gosh, I wonder if he knows kind of who he is at the core. Now, there's always a gap between what is inside of him versus what he can get out. So it doesn't mean that he doesn't necessarily know. But her, seeing her post with her and her husband and expressing her love for him got me to thinking, like, will he be able to do that? I know he has an idea of what it means when he's telling us, I love you, mommy, I love you, daddy, and that kind of thing. But, so it's the other perspective that's going to be brought today by our guest is what is it like living with a diagnosis? How does that get in the way, if at all, of you figuring out who you really truly are at your core? And with that said, I'd like to welcome to the show Brian's daughter, Jo Quinones.
Yeah, everybody, it's special. It's a special treat for me because Jordan, who goes by Joe, actually, I have somebody on my team at work who only refers to her as JoJo. That was our nickname for her. It's always great to have her. First of all, she's very involved in our show. She and by the way, just a quick shout out to our producer Shawn Hall, who's in Hawaii, who's monitoring everything that we're doing. Continues to tell us we have echoes when we're talking. I just don't know if you know what that's about. But anyways, I love Shawn Hall's contribution to what we're doing, and I always love Jo commenting. And we don't get a chance to post her comments all the time, but for those who follow us on Facebook, please follow us on Facebook, Just Your Dad. You can see her comments as they come up during our show. But so we figured let's talk about who we are in the world and talk about labels and all that kind of thing. And why not have an opportunity to spend that time with Jo Quinones? How are you, babe?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Yeah, good. For those that don't know, Shawn and I are in Southern California, in the Los Angeles area. And Jordan, where are you located?
Upstate New York.
Upstate New York, right? So that's awesome. You guys have thunderstorms that we were saying. There's some thunder going on?
It's really dark out. I'm waiting for that thunder to hit and that lightning. We haven't hit that yet. Not yet today, but it has been happening this week.
Hopefully that won't happen until after we're
let's get through the show first. Let's get through this episode.
I'm looking,
Jordan, tell us, that's as we told you about the topic today, did you feel like, oh, I know who I am, or did you have to look inside for a little bit? Because I think, again, for anyone that's neurotypical, who you are is kind of like, regardless, that you just have to stop and take pause. The more labels you have, the more challenging I think it is to figure out who you are at your core. So what was your thought about that? And, just that, what's your thought on that? And
it's funny that you say that. When I get asked, who am I immediately go to, well, I'm a woman, I'm married, I'm a stepmom. Like, I immediately go to like all these labels. I'm a teacher, I work at a school district, like I'm a special ed teacher now. So it's like I'm thinking of like things, but then I actually had to like think and dig deeper, which I'm not very good at. I'm very good at digging deeper.
Don't say that. Just say you don't do that often.
Just don't do it often. Yeah.
Nobody's bad at that.
I don't think anybody's good at it, by the way. I just think it's something either you do it frequently or you don't, and that's okay. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, right. There you go.
But I love that you acknowledge it, by the way, just as a dad. Proud.
I don't like being vulnerable.
That you acknowledge.
Yeah. So when I think of who I am with my learning disability, as of today, even though I'm in a special ed classroom, to them I'm a role model. But to me, I'm special and unique, is what I like to think of. I'm different. I'm different than others. I see things, think differently. Well, we don't like, that's not a good way to say it, because we all think differently. We all see things differently. But with someone who has a learning disability, let's say I don't comprehend as easily or as quickly as, let's say, my husband, for example. He has an IQ of something completely different. So he's really smart, and I really struggle with certain things. Like, he has like a photographic memory. Like, he could memorize a test and take the test and pass it. I look at a test, I take it, I will do not great on it. Like, I'll do poorly on it. So, for me, as a person who works with kids, I'm definitely a role model to them, because I'm like, look, I've been in your shoes, I've been where you actually are, and that's okay. But today I actually had to, so one of my kids said something about another student, and I'm like, look, don't do that, because then if that person actually saw you, he would have taken it differently. And we all learn differently, and I had to explain it to him in more depth for him to understand, because it was a special ed student to another special ed student, but they're totally different. And so I had to explain it and being like, hey, there's movements that some kids do that is like a sensory thing, or that is a movement thing, or that is an excitement kind of movement. And that isn't something that is trying to annoy you, or that's not trying to scare you, or that's not looking very different. It is something that they do to help them be in a different, it's helping them in their own way. And I explained that to them, and they were like, oh, I get that. Oh, I understand.
Yeah, because you have
I had to explain it to them.
Yeah.
But that was like, whoa, like, I just explained that to somebody who's also like me.
Yeah, they process the world differently, right?
We all process it differently. And so for me to show somebody or explain that to them, I was in their shoes at one point. I'm like, hey, this is actually kind of fun. That's why I wanted to be a special ed teacher, was for that reason.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I think that, we all would love to have an impact on our community. And again, I don't mean to speak in generalizations. I think in general, there's like 6 major components of human nature. One of those is a desire to contribute, right? To make a contribution. And if we're making a contribution to our community, then it satisfies one of those basic human needs. Jordan, you represent, you're inspirational, and you remind people that we all process information differently. And so just by being who you are and persevering and overcoming obstacles, that alone is an inspiration for folks, right? I know in the financial world that Shawn and I are in, that you've spent some time in, for people to pass an exam administered by the state is not an easy thing to do for any profession, any certificate program that has compliance requirements and whatnot. And you took the exam several times before you passed it. While that may have been challenging for you as an individual, it's inspirational for those folks who didn't realize that was a struggle, that didn't realize that they have a difficulty with standardized tests. And some people will take a failure of a test as a oh, that must be a divine message. I must not be cut out for this. I probably should quit, right? And you're like, hey, whatever. Don't don't quit. Don't leave. Like, I'm an example. You can persevere here. You can pass. So you become inspirational by your perseverance. And I think that there's a lot to that. Just living your life, right? You can be inspirational by persevering over adversity and other challenges. So, anyways, I think that it's awesome that you happen to be now in doing the thing that you always wanted to do, which was be an educator, be in the world of education, and now serving a special needs classroom as well. Shawn, you were going to say something, but it's such a great thing that you're doing what you were cut out to do, Joe.
Yeah, I just thought of something too. So there's the question of who you are at your core. There's then the question then of who do you want to be, and who do you want to be remembered as? And so I'd ask Jordan this, especially because the special needs label can just, again, the more labels you have, the more distorted the view is in terms of who you are at your core. Jordan, would you say that how big, if at all, is the gap between who you want to be known as and who you'd say you are?
Honestly, I don't know because I haven't been there yet, and I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah,
I thought what my goal, my dream was never going to happen. Like I wanted it to happen, but I never, with all the struggles and all the obstacles I've been through in like the past literally 10 years, never in my life have I saw myself becoming that special ed teacher or becoming in the school district at all. So for me to now be achieving my dream now, I have no way. I now can't say how big that gap is to what I really want to achieve because I'm still now currently living.
You're reveling in.
You're in that
where
moment.
You are. Yeah.
And it's sort of like what happens when you accomplish your dreams and goals, right? What happens when you set a mark and then you hit it and you're like, I'm only 25 and I hit that goal. Right now you got to think, maybe I got to be dreaming, thinking bigger, right? And this happens to a lot of people, by the way.
Well, currently, right? Currently I'm going to school right now to still be that special ed teacher. So I am still thinking, I'm going to be done in 2 years. Maybe I'll be done in 5. I don't know. So right now I'm currently working on school for me to be achieving that. So that's why I'm living right now for this, because that's going to be a whole nother step.
Yeah.
To achieving another part of my goal, which is becoming actually the teacher part.
So to clarify, right now you're in a classroom and you're a teacher's aide in the school district of your neighborhood up there in upstate New York, right? So you're a teacher's aide and you are simultaneously taking classes to actually get your degree so you can get your teacher's credential and actually lead a class. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is a little bit of a gap of where you are and where you want to go.
And I'm still not even a teacher's aide yet. Like I'm still an aide. So then I have to get some credentials, become a teacher's aide. Again, I'm in New York. So there's like
you're on the path. You're on the path.
I'm on the path.
Yeah.
But there's steps for me to take, for me to conquer my full dream.
Right.
For me to be in a school district as an aide in a special ed classroom is already a huge step to where I was 10 years ago. I wanted this, realize this. I wanted this goal and dream when I was in 3rd grade. So I was 7, 8?
To be a special ed teacher.
Right.
Yeah. Your goal to be a special ed teacher, you mean, correct?
Yeah, right. To be a special ed teacher. To now 10 years ago to now I was dealing with a lot, which happens when you're a teenager, early 20s, trying to figure out who you are. As we're speaking of who we are, to now that I'm 25, going to college, to now becoming a teacher's aide, and then that teacher.
Right. And it's funny, Brian, you were talking before about people that, achieve a certain amount of success, and then it's like, oh, now what? There's another book that I'm reading, and I think you're reading it as well. I won't get into it because we're not promoting books here, but, the concepts. But it's a book on habits, and it talks about how people will fall short by focusing on their outcome as opposed to the action. So the idea is that if you focus on the actions become a habit. Let's say the idea is to lose a certain amount of weight and get in shape. If you focus on the outcome, then you do what it takes to get there. When you get to the outcome, then it's like, now what? And the now what can be so subconscious that you go right back to the other habits as it wears off. Whereas if you focus on the action versus the outcome, the actions become not just a habit, but your lifestyle and quote unquote who you are. So it's done automatically and there is no retreat back to the habits that you had before. So that's another variant of this whole who we are.
That's a good point. Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. It's sort of like I kind of look at the sports analogies to some degree, right? You have to envision the outcome and then implement habits that will help you achieve that outcome. In essence, is what you're saying, right?
Right.
Implementation of daily habits. Yeah. That's seriously, it's a whole nother hour-long
And
topic.
again, like everything else, you take that and then you add the special needs component, and it's just magnified by in immeasurably. But it's the conversation that's worth having, and I think that's maybe the direction we're going to go in, as weeks and months come up, because the one thing I'm finding out is we go back to what we always tend to say, especially from our conversation with our friend and frequent viewer Robert Moorhead, which is that there really aren't anything such as special needs. Everyone has the same needs. Everyone needs to know that they matter. Everyone needs to be seen, needs to be heard, needs to be loved. It's just that in some cases, because of a diagnosis or a catastrophic injury, a person has those same needs, but needs them more.
Yeah. Listen, it's accomplishing your goals or achieving your potential with certain limitations, right? Stephen Hawking, still one of the greatest scientific minds we've ever seen. Physical limitations, right? There's so many examples of people who have overcome certain labeled limitations to accomplish their goals and dreams. They don't allow themselves to be limited. They don't allow themselves to be shortchanged. And really, what we do in society is I don't want to call it criminal, but in some cases it is when it comes to this particular community, because we tend to discount or limit our expectations of children and teenagers and young adults and full-fledged adults when we label them as a special needs or anything along any of those, whether it's somebody who's autistic or somebody who's got cerebral palsy, or because we're seeing phenomenal things come out of these brilliant minds who just process information differently. And by the way, Shawn Francis and I process information differently. We're within a year or so of age. We have now very similar backgrounds, and we process information differently. It doesn't mean anything less or more for one or the other. Joe, you're 25. You're going to process information completely differently than Shawn and I, who are 500 years old, right? So you're just going to process information differently. You're going to process information differently than other 25-year-olds. You're going to process information differently than somebody who lives in Ohio or London or the Virgin Islands, just for so many factors that impact how we process information. So, the limitations that we impose on people by giving them the labels is, it's unfair, it's unjust, and it shortchanges the world for amazing potential.
No.
And yeah.
Sorry.
No. I'm off my soapbox for the moment. You can.
I want to go back for a second, and I know I don't mean to go off topic, but I've been thinking about it a lot. When Shawn asked me, "What do I want to be remembered?"
Oh yeah.
In the world?
Good.
I actually haven't. I wanted to answer that.
Good.
Go ahead.
Look at you driving the freaking conversation here.
I'm sorry to
whose kid is
a
this?
little bit.
Yeah, it's good.
I've always wanted to be an inspiration, and I always wanted to be inspiring others, and I don't want others to feel like they're alone, because nobody in this world should be alone, or should feel, maybe phrase that, should feel alone, especially when you have a learning disability, or when you have autism, or when you are nonverbal, or if you're blind, or if you're deaf. All these different disabilities. Even mental health is a disability. Anxiety, depression, there's so much awareness that should be around right now with that. Nobody should feel alone. And if I could at least put my little seed and being like, hey, let me say something, or let me help you in one way that I can, and have them and I don't know what I'm trying to say. If I can just put my little seed and being like, let me do something for you today, I would already feel that I did something for them. Because being in school in LA was rough. It sucked. It sucked. I was called the worst names, and one really stuck to me, which was retard.
Mm-hmm.
That sucked because I am like, how do I deal with that? Because when people said, hey, are you special? I'm like, yeah, I'm special. They're like, haha, special needs. That's the same kid in my class. But they look at it differently. And it made people feel down so they could feel up because they're also embarrassed. Nobody should feel embarrassed to be in special ed. Those classes are there for kids who just need a little bit of a different environment or a different curriculum than others. That's it. It doesn't define who you are. It should never define a person in any way. Yes, okay, you may have autism, you may have a name for it, but that does not define who you are. Nobody should ever feel down or embarrassed or have to have their head down walking in the classroom or in the hallway and feel like people are going to laugh at them.
And that's
that should never happen. And I don't feel like any teacher should allow that to happen because they allowed it to happen to me. And I don't want anyone else to have to feel like that.
You know what you just did? You took me, well, you did two things. First of all, you made me, and this is why this thing is one big onion that, you know, the layers continue to grow, which is we're talking about who you are at your core. Well, you keep forgetting special needs or not, how brutally honest children are. And as a result, when you're a child amongst other children, when you're teased, that can get in the way of who you really are and how you see yourself. And you made me think of myself. I was never given any kind of diagnosis. And the only reason I am certain that one didn't get away and that there probably isn't any actual thing to diagnose is because my parents had me tested for all kind of things growing up. I had great attendance. I was always physically in the classroom. I was almost never mentally there. I'm just talking just tune out. And when the teacher asks a question and the answer is given just before you ask, you know, like for instance, the teacher is in the capital of so-and-so is so-and-so. Mr. Francis, what is the capital of so-and-so? And my answer is either the wrong answer because I'm guessing because I don't want to look stupid, or I'm honest and say, well, you know, I don't know. Either one of those gets you a laugh. The laugh takes place long enough. And then growing up in the Virgin Islands, it is a bastion for higher learning, meaning that people go to the States, get higher education. I had no idea what I was going to necessarily go to school for. So I didn't do that. So then the way that you see yourself, your mirror gets a little muddied because you're like, well, you know what, maybe something's not quite, you know, right with me. So for anybody, that's another thing, anybody that's out there, because we're all about uplifting, anybody that's out there that's thinking, I'm not doing A, I'm not doing B or C, so I must not be D, E, or F. You're a whole lot more than you think you are, you know, because that's another direction. The label sometimes comes because people go to school to get a degree that people think that they should. Because again, when I was coming up, the idea was you go and you get your 4 years, you at least do that. Like something's wrong if you don't do that. Nobody meant to belittle anyone, but people were pushing their kids to, you know, to do that. And so if you didn't do it, something's kind of wrong. There's enough reasons out there for our mirror to be very muddy and for us to have a challenge in figuring out exactly who we are. You just lit that in me as you gave that example, because that's something that takes place every day in a classroom.
And
yeah, you know, no, for sure. Let me just say one thing. I'm not sure where do I turn in my parent card to get a gold star? Because I should get right. We as parents should that's like what a dream to have your child say, I don't want anybody to feel alone. I don't want anybody to feel embarrassed. I don't want anybody to feel, by the way, the stuff that I felt when I was a child growing up and dealing with. Right. And I think that a lot of people who contribute to our society a lot of times will do it because they suffered or they struggled in an area, and they want to make sure that is not that doesn't happen for other people. So Joe, I'm proud of you for that. That's amazing and incredibly insightful for somebody who claims to not, you know, dig deep. That's incredibly deep and again and insightful. So thanks for that. Were you going to say something else, Joe? You're about to say something.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what motivated me to become a special ed teacher.
Yeah, I get it.
Because I wanted to make my classroom a safe place to be for those kids, so they don't. Because I saw kids in the bathroom eating who are in the special ed classrooms. Like that. Why do we have to feel so embarrassed that we have to now go somewhere else that we shouldn't be to eat?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what motivated me to become who I am, and what I'm going for is to inspire someone to be like, hey, can I eat in here? Hey, can I hang out in here? And I'm going to be like, absolutely. This is a safe place to be. There'll be no bullying, no nothing here.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, I've been in New York and I don't see any of that, what I dealt with, which I'm so glad to see. But I don't see any. I mean, there may be, but what I've been seeing and what I've been witnessing for the last 3 years I've been here, there's not much of what I've been through.
And in various areas around the country, you know, there's a various levels of tolerance and intolerance in that area.
Yeah.
So that you know, I get that. But either way, if there's a uniform way to, you know, provide some comfort, and we feel the same way. That's why we do this podcast, is so that we can engage in the conversation of those things that not many people encounter, but at the same time, we all encountered at a different level. You know, to your point, and to both of you, you know, being labeled a gifted child when you're in the early years is also somewhat burdensome, because it's a label that, while in some people can live up to it, some people feel pressure to live up and into that label. So, you know, the idea of being labeled anything as a child, it's as if in a way it's putting us in a box and confining us and limiting us. And really is up to us as individuals to, you know, to develop the ability to dig deep and figure out and define for ourselves who we are in the world and who we would like to, you know, who we would like to be in the world, and what we stand for. And I think that that's the key. And that's the bottom line. Oh, that's the bottom line. That's sort of one of the points of that book, Manifesting for Non-Gurus, and something that I think we're going to have an ongoing conversation about. And, you know, as we're winding this this hour down, I think it's amazing to have this conversation. I always find these conversations with you to be insightful, Joe, because one thing that Shawn acknowledged, and I think it's true for you, is that you are genuine and you are straightforward, and you say what's, you know, you say what's real, and I think it's good. I think you don't put a lot of filter on your conversation. I also think that you need to know, at, you know, in your heart too, how other people perceive you, because they don't perceive you with a limiting label. They perceive you as somebody who's, you know, generous. And, you know, I know in our company, when people talk about you, they talk fondly about your giggle, your laughs, your smiles, your hugs, your caring nature, your empathy, and your desire to make a difference in people's lives. And what a great way to be remembered, right? What a great, and I think I've always said to you, right? If you all could define for yourselves, how do you want people to talk about you when you leave, right? And again, not that people care about really what other people say about us, but do they go, oh God, that person was such a pain in the butt, right? Or it's like, oh my gosh, what a breath of fresh air that was, having a conversation there, right? You can define that. You can decide how that, you know, how that exists for you. Again, I'm proud of you, and I think it's great. And I think you're doing a great thing for the special needs community just by your contribution and your service. And as a parent, it makes me very proud. And I think for parents such as Shawn and other family member, other now really part of our Just Two Dads family, our Just Two Dad family members who have children, you also provide inspiration and hope for their children and their families, knowing that how they've defined some limiting beliefs around what their child may be able to accomplish in the future. I think that you are setting an example again for what's possible. And what you said in the very beginning was so great, was like, I don't know. I'm here now and enjoying this. I don't know what the next thing is going to look like. I probably put words in your mouth, Shawn, but I kind of feel like that's, am I right in that?
That was accurate. Definitely. Because again, that's what I was saying in thinking of this whole thing. There's still a certain amount of wonder. This is one of those steps that's as close as I might get to figuring out, like, well, maybe what is it like to figure out what is in Elijah's head? What's, in terms of his perspective, what he can't get out. That's why in some of our previous guests that have been on, anyone that has been, given a diagnosis and live with it, I'm very fascinated with what that means. Today, we're talking about what it means in terms of your ability to define who you are at your core. But I'm fascinated by what that means on several and every other level, because it's still kind of foreign to me, because I'm used to, as Elijah's dad, being in a situation where there's certain things that he just can't necessarily express. And this is a whole another direction, but the conversation my wife and I have, which you and I talk about in terms of our mission and building a bridge between financial service and education and the special needs community, is, wait a minute, we understand him, though. We understand our child. We know what they want. We know what they need. We know what they're trying to say. We know what this means. To the average ear, they wouldn't know. What happens when we're not here? Which is, again, goes back to the conversation which we all have. So again, like everything else that we talk about each week, there's the topic, and then there's 50 million subtopics that are all related underneath that. So yeah. So I'm hoping that those that are listening today got something out of that, as opposed to just being all over the place.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a little bit about everything, a little all over the place, but also I think there's some very poignant points, Joe, and I really appreciate you. And as we wrap the hour, which is almost upon us now, I just want to let's end this episode. First of all, thank you, Joe, for your contribution, and not a lot of preparation, and which is so great about you, because you don't need a lot of preparation to just be real, right? Which I love. So I thank you for your participation in what we're doing. You give me purpose in life, right? You make me so proud as a parent, and I just, I beam every time I think about where the prognosis was in the beginning and where you are today, and there's two completely different worlds. And I can't wait to see what else you accomplish in the world on a going forward basis. So for my entire family who contributed to your life education, thank you all for your contribution to Jordan, including your siblings, Joe. Like, your siblings have contributed, considerably to your growth.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you to all of our listeners, Robert and Shawn Hall, and obviously our producer in Hawaii, and Robert, who signs on a regular basis and supports us. We love you. And to all of our viewers and listeners who catch us on our various outlets, podcasts, please, go to our YouTube page, and it's under Just Two Dads, and subscribe and like and share. Again, ask us questions. Let us talk about topics that are important to you. We do have some great guests lined up. We just have a matter of a couple of interesting things on timing. And so we've got some more guests coming up that are going to be awesome conversations for us to have. So thank you all to our listeners in the U.S. Virgin Islands, WSTX AM radio. We love you. We hope that we're making a contribution to your day and to your weeks, and we look forward to spending some time down there in person with you as well as we move along in our Just Two Dads podcast. And Shawn Francis, my partner, thank you for giving me the platform to continue to have these conversations openly and in public. And I didn't cry today, which I thought I was going to do. So I'm happy that we got through an episode without that. And then I'll throw it to you. Again, last thing I'll say is that this is all about now more than ever. Jordan's a great example of empathy and love, sharing empathy and love with those around us, make them feel not alone, make them feel like they belong, they matter, and they're here for a purpose, for a reason. So again, thank you, Joe. Shawn, you want to?
Most definitely. I'll close us out. I just want to touch on it in this last week in particular, not just guests that we had lined up, but just, it seems like across social media, I've seen a lot of people who have either lost loved ones or have loved ones that are on the precipice of departure. So for those people, pray for a peaceful journey, pray for peace and comfort. And for everyone listening, just know that somebody needs to know that everyone needs to know that they matter. They need to know that they're heard. They need to know that they're seen. And there's somebody out there that needs your love and just needs to know that you care. And so I also want to thank the women in my life, my mom, Jan, and my wife, Laura. I could not begin to attempt to be who I hope to become without their support. And thank everyone for listening on all the platforms. We'll see you next week. And if you're watching, listening, we love you. Thank you.
I love you. Goodbye.